Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Normal podcast, where we highlight minority business owners and founders, and we use this platform to shed light on their entrepreneur journey. Welcome to the Beyond Normal podcast. I'm excited to have Jason Terrell, co-founder of The Profound Gentleman, where he is setting up a spot for minority teachers to come together, have resources. I'm excited to have Jason on the show.
I appreciate it for having me. Yeah, it's been a crazy time, but I'm excited to get into everything.
Definitely. I know the work that you're doing, you know, it has an immediate impact in our community. So do you want to give folks just a little bit of background about what you do at Profound Gentlemen?
Yeah. I'll share a little bit about what the organization is. And I'll start by sharing about myself, because my story kind of ties into the work. So I grew up in the Atlanta area. I was raised by my parents and my grandparents. My parents had me in high school, so my grandparents, for the most part, raised me. And my grandfather was a minister. So I was always in kind of like a preacher's kid, always in the church community. But he had an interesting take on his ministry, and that he really embedded social justice within his ministry and his work. And so for me, I grew up with, wanting to do something social justice oriented. I didn't really know what that was. I never thought about, even college. That wasn't necessarily my route. I didn't know how I wanted to do what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to give back to my community in some way. But ended up going to school, and that exposed me to a lot of different career paths. And initially I thought about law. I was thinking, maybe I could be a lawyer or, go back into the community as a public defender or something like that. But as I got further into law classes, decided that, I wanted to be more closer with people. Looking at my grandfather and how he navigated, he was always with church members, whether they were in hospice care or he just got married, but he was always with people. And so that idea of being with community is really important for me. And so instead of, interning at law firms every summer, I always went back to Atlanta and started working at after school programs, and ran summer camps for kids, and really fell in love with teaching and working with students. And so towards my senior year, tried to figure out, was I going to go the law route like I've been telling folks, or was I going to pursue something else? And so I decided to take a leap of faith and go into the classroom to be a teacher. And so I became a Teach for America teacher. It's basically a program that places folks in under Title I or under-resourced schools for a 2-year period. So I was at a middle school in North Charlotte I stayed past my 2-year commitment, but I became a teacher, middle school English teacher, and just really fell in love with education, my kids, but definitely the community surrounding my school. Got a chance to meet parents and grandparents and fathers, and really was involved in that way. But the work of PG started from that space. So, I was one of the few Black men in my school buildings. There were not a lot of brothers who looked like me, even though 100% of my kids were either Black. Most of them were Black. Maybe a couple of kids were Latino. Maybe had 2 white kids that I taught for 3 years at my middle school. But specifically my boys, they didn't necessarily have opportunities to see reinforced images of success, right? So they would have mentorship programs where mentors may come in once a month, talk with the kids, but on a consistent basis every single day, they were looking for, and they were really yearning for support. And so I became the adjunct father, dad to a lot of boys in my school. And I coached sports too. I was a football and baseball coach. So not only my students that I coached, but also other kids that I didn't even teach or know found their way to my classroom. And my story wasn't unique. There was a couple of other Black men, maybe 2 or 3 in my building who did the same thing for their students, who were either football coaches or just generally just resources for students. But we came together, some guys in my school, but just other schools in the Charlotte community, around the strength that, there's not a lot of Black men in the classroom, and our boys are needing to see other images of success. So trying to figure out how we can close that gap. So that's a little bit about the big picture overview of it, but that's a little bit about the work that we do.
I appreciate that. And you mentioned North Charlotte, I'm familiar with the Charlotte area. And, I could think, even, volunteering at some of the schools in Charlotte, some of the stats that teachers would tell us hey, what, 95% of the students, in certain classrooms, they don't have both their parents, right? Single parent households, a lot of times, what that ends up being for, young men like that look like me and you, it pretty much means that they're with their mom and they don't have that father figure in their life. So I appreciate you connecting two and two and realizing like there's an opportunity for Black males to be in the lives of those children. And then that kind of gives them, it plants the seed so they can see, Black Panthers around them, right? They want to see, individuals like Chad, who, obviously recently passed away, but we want to see individuals like that in our community. And, that is a gap. That's an area where we got some opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like, a lot of my students, they did not come from like 2-parent households, or they came from like non-nuclear family structures. Like, again, I liken myself to that in a lot. Like, my parents are divorced, but I was raised by my grandparents at an early age, and then I was raised by my parents, and then they got separated. So I had similar experiences, but I definitely, I know for me, I always had like, again, 2 parents in terms of my grandparents. I always had a sense of stability, and a lot of kids don't have that. So the school that I taught at, it was called a McKinney-Vento school. And in Charlotte, the McKinney-Vento program is your homeless students. It's kind of how they identify. Instead of calling them like transitional, they're called the McKinney-Vento students. And so honestly, I had a lot of kids who came to school with like their clothes and like, Walmart bags kind of thing. Like, they were staying in like transitional housing programs. So their, school was that space of stability. It might not be fun or like the most exciting place, but like that's where you have adults who provide structure and like meals. Like, you have like that. Sometimes it becomes home for a lot of kids, whether they like it or not. And so that's why I think having teachers in the school building who identify like your students, who can connect with them on a lot of different ways, but also show them like, education could be fun. Like, you can like, and being smart and like reading. I was an English teacher, so for me, reading books was a big thing for me. I try to make it not necessarily cool, but like, that's your pathway to success is through knowledge and through education. So that was what I was trying to embed, as much as I possibly could.
No, I appreciate that. And so thinking around, right, you figured out what that purpose was, how you wanted to connect it to the Profound Gentlemen organization. Talk a little bit around, what really sparked the idea for you to go in and say, hey, I want to have, I want to start this organization. I want to start this. Essentially, it's a company, right? How do you go about taking that leap of faith and plunging into that experience?
Yeah. So the backstory of how we even started. So there's not a lot of. There's a few organizations across the country that do teacher recruitment. So like, the pathway to become a teacher is either you go to school, you major in education, you become a teacher, or you go through like an alternative certification program. So there's not a lot of, they're starting to become a lot more, but they're not a lot of the alternative certification programs. So Teach for America is like one of the larger ones. And so at the time, myself and my business partner were both going out for the same job. So Teach for America, they were trying to do this push to get more Black men in the classroom. They called it Dream Rise Do. And they were partnering with Alpha Phi Alpha to like do this whole initiative. And they were hiring like people like program officers to kind of like lead that work. So we both went out for the position around my 3rd year teaching, and we both actually got denied from the job. Like, we got told no at the same time. And so I remember us sitting in like a lobby of like conference rooms, like, we see the need. We could probably do this work a little bit better, mainly because, Teach for America is a really, really large organization. They're not even, their staff, 80% of their staff and leadership don't identify with men of color. They're not Black men. I would say 90% of the staff are women, but Black men is probably even a smaller segment. So we're thinking about how could we be as competitive? And we had already been gathering teachers in Charlotte. So we were like meeting up, like having informal meetups. So we didn't have like a name or budget or an agenda. We were just kind of meeting up as like teachers that we knew. So we were meeting about 30 or 40 deep at a time, just having conversations amongst ourselves. And so we really brought the idea to the group. It's like, let's start something more formal. Not necessarily to compete against the TFA at all, but it was just like we saw that was an opportunity that didn't exist. Like, there was a gap. Men of color make up 2% of all your teachers. So there's a gap there. And there was nobody there was no national organization that was like filling that gap or even working on different strategies to increase that percentages. And so it started off with like a group of guys who met consistently, and they were the ones who pushed us to think about how do we create more of a formal structure. So instead of us just meeting and venting about issues, like how do we put programs in place, how do we bring speakers in, go to conferences, like actually have like a formal program. And so, it really took a lot of long days and like just planning out a program structure. We filed for our incorporation status through North Carolina Halloween of 2014. And got our 501c3 around March of 2015. And we really got started through some seed funding that we won. So we started to pitch our idea to a couple of different venture philanthropists that provide seed funding to early stage ventures. So one is called Echo and Green. They're based in New York. And they do a really dope job at providing seed funding to, again, early stage organizations, but they do look at Black organizations. They have a specific focus on Black male achievement. And that was a portfolio that we were a part of. And so they provided us with seed funding. Now, seed funding wasn't a lot. We had to quit our jobs to do this, but we actually took a pay cut from teaching. So I had to sell my car. I got a second job. I moved out of my apartment and downsized, same with my business partner. And so, but it gave us the ability to have 100% of our time focused on this idea. And so instead of the money, I had more time. And so that fellowship was about a 2-year fellowship. And so, and they also provide us with a coach that helped us with our business model. Because we're a nonprofit, but I always say nonprofit and for profit, the only difference is it's a box on the form. It's no different. We both have to raise money, either through products or through fundraising. We both sell a service to a degree. Both have to have clientele. So there's not a lot of differences, but then there's some, of course, advantages and disadvantages of both. But I had never ran a business in that way before. So for me, this was it was basically learning how to lead a team, how to run a business, how to raise money, how to budget, how to do all those things. But we saw a need, and we felt like we had the strength to fill that need, and we kept going with it.
Yeah, and that's really that's great. Like you said, it's a great experience for you to be able to put your time into something that you see a purpose in. And you spoke to wearing those different hats. Just you're the owner of it, right? Everything kind of falls on your shoulders and your co-founder's shoulders. So can you give us, obviously wearing those different hats, you kind of get pushed out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You get pushed into situations where you got to grow, you got to make mistakes, but that's part of the process. What's something that you learned, going through the process that, you would have liked to, maybe if you could send something back to the future, in the past, right? To your yourself in 2014, what's something that you would have liked to know back then that you learned throughout the process that you feel like was a instrumental, growth experience?
I think the biggest thing, and there's a quote, and I forget, I'm not going to quote it because I forgot. But basically the theme is, don't be okay with, sometimes good is okay. I think sometimes you try to get the perfect idea, the perfect this, and the perfect that. Sometimes it's okay with just being okay in some scenarios. And so oftentimes I overthought the process because I was trying to be perfect. And I was trying to have the best this, but that wasted a lot of time. And I was overthinking it. So a good example is fundraising. So that was the hardest thing to break into, was where, we raise money through individuals, but also through these major companies. So Bank of America's and Wells Fargo's and, Walton Family Foundations and all these major funding companies, we raise money to support the program. But I think a lot of it is, and I'll be very transparent. I've had a program officer tell me, a couple of program officers at major foundations tell me that, when Black organizations apply for funding, one, they don't necessarily they apply for 50% under what their white colleagues are applying for. And also their work is almost 10 times doper. Their metrics are even tighter. It's almost sometimes I'm conditioned at least to trying to show up 110%, but not even asking for that,
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to really get out of the habit of sometimes it's okay to say, hey, we don't have everything figured out yet, but we're on a journey to figuring it out, and ask for what I'm worth. And I think I'm just reflecting, those are probably the two things that I undersold myself a lot on. And so like if I had to like talk to my younger self, or just the self that was early in the state and in the process, it would be, don't overthink it. You don't have to be perfect, and then get what you're worth essentially.
And that's a great lesson for the folks listening who are, they're thinking about taking chances on themselves. During this time when it comes to maybe starting your own business, having a side hustle. And then really, if you're going to be in corporate America, you still, like, to your point, right, you got to be able to, if you're putting in that 110%, that should equate to 110% in terms of pay, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to kind of start, making sure everything's equal.
Yeah.
And not necessarily going into a situation and kind of essentially handicapping ourselves, which I think a lot of times we just say, hey, we're going to bust our butt and things are going to naturally come to me, by me working. But on the flip side of that, you got to ask, because closed mouths do not get fed. I think that's been around forever, right? And we're learning it, but some of the stuff that I think we've been conditioned to, some of the things that we were conditioned to do, as you think about us coming through the traditional education system, was, hey, you get a degree, you get these things, and stuff naturally comes to you. It didn't work like that for anybody in my group. I don't know about for your group, Jason.
Not at
all. They sold us like this crazy, pie in the sky, and we had to, it's somewhat humbling, right? You kind of got yourself out there, which is what you did. But once you get past that, you come out the other end, and you're going to be running like a well-oiled machine, I think, in terms of your career and your path.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is 110%. I think, like I said, from an overthinking standpoint, I was reading books like How to Make the Ask and like, trying to get like the theory behind it, when it's sometimes just opening your mouth and just say, this is what I need. That's not, there's a science to it. Yeah, it's an art to everything, but sometimes I think it's as simple as that. Closed mouths don't get fed at the end of the day.
Exactly. So, you spoke a little bit, you mentioned, having that co-founder. A lot of folks are saying, how do I build something on my own? But I think it's very interesting that you took more of a collaborative effort, a collaborative approach right from the very beginning. So could you, maybe speak to some of the pros to, going into something with a co-founder?
Yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend folks, I think being a solo founder is cool. Like it's great. I met a lot of folks who are that. And I think I'm learning that it really is kind of personality dependent sometimes. Like I think some people probably are really great working, just like doing the work. As a solo founder, I think for me, I needed to have a co-founder, and mainly because there were gaps that both of us had. And so we were able to specialize in areas that we were able to kind of specialize in a specific area and grow in that area. So I think, for me, I didn't know, if you are a seasoned leader, you probably recognize a lot of your gaps already. I think being a solo founder is great. But for me, I started the program when I was 23, 24. Then, I was teaching still. Like I didn't really understand I didn't recognize or know my gaps yet. And so when we started the program, to give you an example, when we started the program, our roles were reversed. So right now I currently serve as the executive director of the program, but my main job is like the business side. So I do all the fundraising. Well, not all of it, but I lead the fundraising, the partnerships, the making sure the paperwork is straight, the governance, like all that. My business partner does all the programming work. So we call his side the impact team. So any of the evaluations, the programs, implementation, all of that is his wheelhouse. When we first started the program, our roles were reversed. I was doing the programming work, and he was doing my job. And we both sucked at it. And I thought I was going to, for me, I thought I was going to be a programmer. Like, I was a teacher. I'm used to like leading like curriculum and workshops, but that's not my skill set. Like I'm not, it takes a really, really like level of detail to like lead and execute series of workshops. I'm much, much better on the business side, talking with folks, raising money or like doing budgeting. I like numbers. I didn't know I like numbers until I started to do this work. I've always like had a fear of numbers in the past. So I think as I'm growing, I'm a little older, I'm about to be 30. So as I'm like just, getting a little older and understanding myself a lot more, I'm understanding where my gaps and my weaknesses are. So, I think we were able to specialize in the areas that really fueled us. And so I recommend it, especially if you're just starting off and you really don't understand where you fit yet. in just the whole space, I would recommend getting a co-founder. That way, you guys can like divvy out responsibilities amongst yourself. And it does help to have, like you mentioned earlier, equal weight. So like, it helps spread that out. So I am, we both are both our names are founders of the program. So, but it does help to know that, Mario can trust me to know that I'll get the finances straight, and I can trust that the program will be implemented like with fidelity and the best of the ability. And so I don't have to think about that at night, and hopefully he doesn't have to worry too much about like the other side of the house as well.
Yeah, I love the like you said, it's just like yin and yang. It's just two different sides of the same coin. That whatever that coin is worth, you both are going to partake in it, and it's better to have 50% of something that's worth a significant amount versus zero. 100% of something that's worth zero, right?
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
I think that's what that boils down to, and I appreciate you providing that feedback there. This year really started out, 2020 has been a roller coaster year, I think, for everybody. It started out with COVID and that kind of, I think the COVID kind of outbreaks that we're still kind of certainly seeing the effects of right now. I think that started, the year off on whatever foot we want to call it. It wasn't the best foot. It wasn't probably the way that a lot of folks wanted to start out 2020. But then we had George Floyd, and that really ignited some of the conversations that we're seeing right now around racial and social inequalities. So how are those conversations as you are building out, a minority-driven organization? Like, how have those conversations impacted you personally, and then the work that you're doing for Profound Gentlemen?
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. Like when we first started the program, Jonathan Farrell was a guy who was involved in a police-involved murder, essentially a shooting in Charlotte. He was a FAMU student. Was in Charlotte, and he got in a car wreck late at night, and so he was knocking on a woman's door. She called the cops. Cops showed up, and because he was a different neighborhood, I think he had like street clothes on or whatever. It was like 3 a.m. I don't know what the case was, but I do know he's dead. So that was I was teaching at the time, so I remember vividly, and it happened in my students' neighborhood. My students were, in the same neighborhood of the city. They grew up in the same area. So I definitely remember having a lot of conversations about, just like police-involved shootings. I mean, we even read texts. I was able to pull in texts from like Oscar Grant and like Fruitville Station and all that. This is a part of our story and a part of their story. And so this is no different. So I think our organization is kind of rooted in that. At least that's how how I show up and see the world as a person who's trying to like change, one kid's mind or one kid's, track, so to speak. But it's interesting to see like a lot of other communities who I didn't think would embrace this idea of like racial equity, embrace it. So an example, when the last, it's almost like a wave, but the last wave of just like police involved shootings happened, every company that I know of, majority of companies either put out a statement of support and or put out funding. A lot of companies put up funding from Pepsi to Netflix to like Bank of America, Duke Energy. I mean, I would, name a company. I'm sure like they have put up something. Is even like, company like Chick-fil-A, who's had a history of, pretty conservative policies. They've put up a $5 million fund for Black organizations. So there's a lot of money right now circulating in the space. And I think, I've been in a weird position because on the one hand, I know this just to be honest, is probably like a flavor of the month for a lot of folks. Like this is a marketing plan to like make sure they can like, look good externally. And then on the other hand, I don't want to overthink it and like not miss out on the opportunities. And there's some doors that may have been closed before that may now be open, or people's hearts may be a little bit more at ease to hear what we have to say. So, and when everything kind of started, we had a chance to like kind of build like a little like Google sheet of all the organizations who had different type of again funding and or statements. And we had we just reached out, cold call, cold email anybody that we can find. And so we did have were able to like apply for a few different grants. So we just finished applying for Duke Energy. They had like $1 million fund for racial justice organizations that we applied for. So we haven't got anything yet, but we're definitely seeing that spaces. You can easily, people are listening at least, like especially folks in like the foundation and corporate spaces where, again, typically their grant making was a little bit more conservative. They're willing to like invest in a Black organization whose mission is explicitly focused on like Black male teachers, essentially. But on the one hand, like, there's always like two sides. Like now you do have organizations who have probably a lot more bandwidth, either like financial capital or social capital, for now thinking about racial equity as like a platform. So I also have been reached out to by a lot of organizations who in the past would never talked about race before, are being very explicit about race. So which, it's not my place to judge them, but I'm just trying to understand, who's going to be here 2-3 years from now, when, the tide is hopefully, if the tide changes at all. So it's a weird space to be in, but for the most part, we have like seen a lot of good support. And just, if anything, people's like hearts and guards are down just a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for opening up on that. Like you said, we see a lot of stuff in the media right now. This topic, sadly for some companies, is probably going to be the buzzworthy thing for them to promote. But, on the flip side of that, there are some organizations and some individuals who are really willing to put in that capital to see that change. Like you said, right, 3 to 5 years down the road, when we have the next crop of, minority, talent coming into the workforce. And, we talk about some of the students that, you're preparing for, that adulthood phase of their life. We want to make sure that they're set up for success. And they have those resources at their disposal, and we just want an even playing field, right? Mm-hmm. So when, a young man like yourself or me, when that young man graduates, he feels like he's got, the full support of, essentially all of America, and there's some resources really worldwide that are making sure he has an even playing field compared to his peers.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, man. I think, and that's like, everything you mentioned that's what, for me at least, I just want, it should be equity is like that even playing field to a degree. Yeah, so I agree with you 1,000%.
And so, I want my next question to be around, what's the next for Profound Gentlemen? I know you're always thinking ahead around just collaborations, partnerships you want to see. What's the next for the organization?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you mentioned partnerships. That's kind of the vibe I've been on lately is, I look at PG as just like, we're just one piece of a larger puzzle. I mean, we're focused on a very, very, very narrow topic. So again, we're just focused on like getting more Black men or, men of color. We do have some Latino brothers in our program into the classroom, but that's one piece of a whole big puzzle of like equity within education. And so I recognize that. I think we could do a lot of great work, but there's a lot of other partnerships in place. So there's in the nonprofit space, and then I'm sure, I don't know, it might extend beyond the nonprofit space, but we call it like collective impact strategy. It's like, you take your collective impact into like one, and you take a couple of organizations who have the same vision and you build like a strategy to support work in generally. So we've been in like 2 or 3 different collaboration projects with other organizations who are focused on like education equity at different ways. So one is with 2 organizations in the Carolinas. One group is out in Durham. They're called Village of Wisdom, and they're building like parent voice. So again, we don't work with parents, but they do. They have like, that's part of the work too, is like, you can be a great teacher, but these kids go home. Like they're going home into a community where they need adults who are also going to reinforce. And it should be like, we should be talking to each other. And then the other group that we're partnering with, they're called the Center for Race Equity and Education. Like they stand for CREED. And they do like, they work with districts to change like systems and policies. Again, we don't do that. So they're more at the systems level. And so that's those are just 2 groups that we both led by like, folks of color leading the work, but we got funding to like do a collaboration project. And there's a couple of other examples of those that we're working on. So right now, I think for us, especially during the time of COVID, when, resources are scarce, like, yes, there are a lot of grant funding that is available, but there are a lot of funders too who are, and a lot of companies and individuals who, have lost their jobs, who have had to lay off folks, have furloughs, so the resources are tighter. So we're trying to think about how we can strategically partner with other like-minded organizations to go after funding together. versus all three of us or all four of us having to go at it individually. And so that's a little bit about some of the work. And so again, we're in about 2 to 3 different collaboration projects, and hopefully they turn into other types of work moving forward. But I'm finding like, just how much like we need to rely on each other as an ecosystem in order to succeed.
Thanks for that. And tell the listeners, how they can keep up with all things that are going on with Profound Gentlemen, and just ways that they can stay engaged and maybe even donate.
Yeah, so we're definitely on social media. So follow us on Instagram. It's Profound Gentlemen. Twitter is PG Educator. Facebook Profound Gentlemen. YouTube, whatever, different any social media channel. We try to be active. But like website is profoundgentlemen.org. You'll be able to find just a little bit of more information about the program. And we always, for us, we want folks to donate. So, there's a donate section, but also there's a lot of volunteer opportunities, and we have events. Typically when things were in person, we do a lot of events in person in different cities, and in either happy hour events or fundraiser events, or just events where we can come together and build with the community and teachers. And so, please check out our website. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll get updates on the events. We're doing a virtual wine tasting event now to support, raise money for back to school. So a lot of teachers are going into schools where, not only they don't have the infrastructure, but the students don't have desks, very simple things. So the money that we're raising through our back to school series is going back into the hands of educators to do, if they need to buy supplies for students, they can. If they need to buy supplies for themselves, they can. But that's on our website. So there's a lot of different ways to stay engaged and involved. But again, we take a little bit or a lot, or however much folks can support. We'll take everything.
Thanks for that, sir. In closing, I want to pass it to you just one last time. If there's anything you want to close out with, I appreciate you, being on the show. But if there's anything you want to leave the audience with, the listeners with at this time, feel free to do so. Yeah,
I think the biggest thing is, I love this podcast and the platform, and I support, I think my values are definitely tied into entrepreneurship, especially for Black people. I think we definitely need to continue to create and build our own infrastructures. That's kind of what we're trying to do for teachers is we need to be teaching our own kids, and so we need to. So any ways that I can support, I would just lend my support too. We're 6 years in and we have some strategies, but we're always open to learn about other strategies. But if folks are interested in either nonprofit or for-profit, or you're looking for different fellowships, that has been a big area for growth. So we had a lot of these incubators and fellowships that we've applied for that give you funding, but also coaching. So I've been privileged to be a part of a lot of great spaces and have met a lot of great folks who lead organizations. So if I could be a resource around whatever, I'm down to support and lend my services, just in just conversation. And also if we could learn, if folks have ideas to help us grow, or just general things that we could do to better support teachers, let us know. I think it should be about collaboration and sharing. So I'm open for it.
Thanks for that, Jason. I think Profound Gentlemen has got a bright future. I appreciate the work you and your team are doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing 5 years out what you guys have built up. But I know you guys are grinding right now, so appreciate you being on this episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Normal podcast. We can be streamed across all major streaming platforms in addition to YouTube. Come back again. Wow.